For 3 centuries, Freemasons have been at the forefront of the greatest revolutions and political transformations in our world. From American independence to the European revolutions, from the Napoleonic Wars to the creation of modern democracies, the influence of Masonic philosophy can be traced in the fateful decisions of kings and presidents. Today, we will reveal the secrets of the influence of the Brotherhood of Freemasons on world politics and learn how ancient Masonic principles shaped the face of modern civilization. If you are interested in the topic of the influence of secret societies on world history, subscribe to our channel and like this video. And in the comments, share your opinion. Did Masonic principles of freedom, equality, and brotherhood really become the basis of modern democracy? Or is it just a historical coincidence? Your point of view will help us better understand this complex topic. Freemasonry originated in the early 18th century as a secret brotherhood that united representatives of various social strata under the ideals of enlightenment, equality, and brotherhood. The first official Grand Lodge was founded in London in 1717, but the roots of this movement go much deeper, to the medieval guilds of masons and cathedral builders. Initially, Freemasons positioned themselves as a philosophical society striving for moral improvement and the dissemination of knowledge. However, in the first decades of its existence, the lodge became a meeting place for influential politicians, bankers, and aristocrats. Masonic meetings turned into an informal platform for discussing state affairs and planning political reforms. The Age of Enlightenment played a special role in the politicization of Freemasonry. The ideas of Voltaire, Rousseau, and other philosophers found fertile ground in Masonic lodges, where concepts of natural human rights, separation of powers, and popular sovereignty were discussed. Many future leaders of the American and French revolutions first encountered these ideas within the walls of Masonic lodges. By the middle of the 18th century, Freemasonry had spread throughout Europe and penetrated the New World. In each country, the lodges adapted to local conditions but retained common principles and rituals. The most important feature of Freemasonry was its non-denominational nature. Catholics and Protestants, Christians and representatives of other religions met in the lodges. The first documented cases of Freemasons influencing politics date back to the late 17th and early 18th centuries. In England, many members of Parliament belonged to lodges, which allowed them to coordinate their actions and pursue a concerted policy. Similar processes took place in France, where Masonic lodges became centers of opposition activity against absolutism. Masonic symbols and rituals, borrowed from architecture and geometry, acquired a deep philosophical meaning. The compass symbolized spiritual perfection, the square symbolized morality, and the plumb line symbolized justice. Freemasons sought to embody these principles not only in their personal lives, but also in their social and political activities. The secret nature of Masonic meetings gave rise to many rumors and suspicions. The Catholic Church was one of the first to oppose Freemasonry, seeing it as a threat to traditional values. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued a bull prohibiting Catholics from joining Masonic lodges under threat of excommunication. Despite persecution, Freemasonry continued to grow and strengthen. By the end of the 18th century, there were hundreds of lodges in Europe and America, with tens of thousands of members. Among them were many prominent political figures who would later shape the course of world history. But who exactly were these people? And how did their Masonic affiliation influence the fate of nations? George Washington, the first President of the United States of America, was initiated into Freemasonry on November 22, 1752, at the Fredericksburg Lodge in Virginia. At that time, he was only 20 years old, but even then, he was already displaying the qualities that would make him a great leader. The Masonic principles of brotherhood, morality, and service to society had a profound influence on the formation of his worldview and political philosophy. In the Masonic Lodge, the young Washington became acquainted with the ideas of religious tolerance and equality before the law, which would later become the cornerstones of American democracy. The Masonic Brotherhood united people of different faiths and social classes, which was revolutionary for its time. Washington later embodied these principles in the U.S. Constitution and the policy of religious freedom. During the War of Independence, Masonic ties played an important role in coordinating the actions of American revolutionaries. Many officers of the Continental Army, including the Marquis de Lafayette, Baron von Steuben, and General Nathanael Greene, were Freemasons. They used Masonic channels of communication to transmit secret information and coordinate military operations. Washington's Masonic beliefs were particularly evident when the cornerstone of the Capitol was laid on September 24, 1793. The ceremony was conducted according to Masonic ritual, and the president himself was dressed in a Masonic apron given to him by the Marquis de Lafayette. This symbolic act emphasized the connection between Masonic ideals and the construction of a new state. Masonic influence can also be seen in the architectural appearance of Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. The city plan, designed by Pierre L'Enfant, also a Mason, contained many Masonic symbols. The streets form geometric shapes that have sacred meaning in Masonic tradition, and many buildings are decorated with Masonic symbols. Masonic moral principles defined Washington's political style as president. He refused a third term, setting a precedent for the voluntary transfer of power, which was contrary to European traditions of the time. Masonic ideas about serving society and limiting personal power were embodied in this historic decision. Washington's religious policy also reflected Masonic principles of religious tolerance. His famous letter to the Jewish community of Newport, in which he guaranteed religious freedom to all Americans, echoes the Masonic tradition of uniting people of different faiths. Masonic lodges were among the first organizations where Catholics and Protestants, Christians and Jews could meet on equal terms. The foreign policy of the first president also bore the mark of Masonic ideals. The doctrine of neutrality and non-interference in European conflicts reflected the Masonic principles of peace and brotherhood among nations. Washington believed that America should be an example of freedom and democracy for the whole world. Masonic connections helped Washington during difficult moments of his presidency. During the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania, he used Masonic channels to peacefully resolve the conflict. Many participants in the rebellion were Masons, which facilitated negotiations and prevented bloodshed. Washington's farewell address to the nation is imbued with Masonic ideals of unity, morality, and service to the common good. His warnings against partisanship and factionalism reflect the Masonic desire for harmony and brotherhood. To this day, this address is considered one of the most important documents of American political thought. Washington's personal life was also marked by fidelity to Masonic principles. His relationship with his wife Martha, his care for his adopted children, and his fair treatment of slaves, whom he freed in his will, testify to the profound influence of Masonic ethics on his character. But was Washington the only Mason among America's founding fathers? The French Revolution of 1789 was a turning point in European history. and Freemasons played a huge role in these events. By the beginning of the Revolution, there were more than 700 Masonic lodges in France, with about 30,000 members. Among them were representatives of all social classes, from aristocrats to bourgeoisie, and even some members of the clergy. Masonic lodges became true centers of Enlightenment ideas in France. Within their walls, the works of Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, and other philosophers of the Enlightenment were discussed. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which became the slogan of the Revolution, had long been maturing in Masonic circles. The lodges provided the only place where representatives of different classes could meet on equal terms and discuss political reforms. Jacques-Pierre Brissot, leader of the Girondins, was an active Freemason and used his Masonic connections to coordinate revolutionary activities. His political program was largely based on the Masonic principles of religious tolerance and civil liberties. Brissot believed that Masonic ideals should form the basis of a new French society. The Marquis de Lafayette, hero of two revolutions, the American and the French, played a key role in linking Freemasonry and the revolutionary events. His Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was imbued with Masonic ideas about natural rights and human dignity. Lafayette used his international Masonic connections to gain support for the revolution abroad. Danton, Mirabeau, Camille Desmoulins, many prominent figures of the revolution were members of Masonic lodges. They saw the revolution as the embodiment of Masonic ideals in public life. Masonic lodges served as a place for planning revolutionary actions and coordinating the activities of various political groups. Provincial Masonic lodges played a special role. They became centers for the spread of revolutionary ideas outside Paris and ensured support for the revolution in the regions. The Masonic network allowed for the rapid transmission of information and coordination of actions across the country, which was critical to the success of the revolution. The symbols of the French Revolution also bear the mark of Masonic influence. The triangle, the all-seeing eye, the torch of liberty. Many revolutionary symbols have Masonic origins. Even architectural projects of the revolutionary era, such as Étienne Louis Boulet's plans for new public buildings, reflected Masonic ideas of geometric harmony and symbolism. However, Freemasonry was not unanimous in its attitude toward the revolution. Many aristocratic Freemasons emigrated, unable to accept the radical changes. The Duke of Orleans, Grand Master of French Freemasonry, supported the revolution but was later executed by the Jacobins. These contradictions show the complexity of the relationship between Freemasonry and the revolutionary movement. The Reign of Terror was a test for French Freemasonry. Many lodges were closed and their members persecuted. Maximilien Robespierre, who was not a Freemason himself, was suspicious of secret societies and saw them as a threat to the purity of the revolution. Paradoxically, the Masonic ideals that fueled the revolution came to be perceived as counter-revolutionary. Nevertheless, the influence of Freemasonry on the formation of modern democratic thought through the French Revolution is undeniable. The principles of separation of powers, civil rights, religious tolerance, and popular sovereignty, first implemented in revolutionary France, had deep roots in Masonic philosophy. Napoleon Bonaparte, who came to power after the Revolution, took a pragmatic approach to Freemasonry. He understood its influence and sought to place Masonic lodges under state control. The emperor's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, became Grand Master of French Freemasonry, and Napoleon himself used Masonic structures to spread revolutionary ideas throughout conquered Europe. The influence of the French Revolution on European Freemasonry was enormous. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity proclaimed in Paris found resonance in Masonic lodges across the continent. Revolutionary ideas spread through Masonic channels faster than official diplomacy and the press. Counter-revolutionary forces also recognized the danger of Masonic influence. Abbé Augustin Barruel, in his Memoirs for the History of Jacobinism, accused the Freemasons of organizing the revolution, giving rise to conspiracy theories about a Masonic conspiracy. These accusations, although exaggerated, had some basis in fact. Women's Masonic lodges, or adoption lodges, also played an important role in spreading revolutionary ideas. Madame Roland, wife of the Minister of the Interior of the Girondist government, used her influence in women's lodges to mobilize support for the revolution among aristocratic ladies. The revolutionary government's religious policy reflected the Masonic idea of the separation of church and state. The civil organization of the clergy, adopted in 1790, deprived the Catholic Church of political influence and established the principle of religious freedom, long preached in Masonic lodges. The economic reforms of the Revolution also bore the stamp of Masonic ideas. The abolition of feudal privileges and the proclamation of freedom of trade and enterprise were in line with Masonic ideas about a just social order. Many of the deputies of the National Assembly who carried out these reforms were members of Masonic lodges. The international influence of the French Revolution was largely exerted through Masonic channels. The Revolutionary Wars spread Masonic ideas throughout Europe, and Napoleon's campaigns finally established the principles of liberty and equality in the European legal consciousness. The tragedy of French Freemasonry was that the revolution it helped to bring about ultimately turned against its creators. Many Freemasons died on the guillotine, and their lodges were closed. But the seeds sown by Freemasonry in pre-revolutionary France sprouted throughout Europe. What role did Freemasonry play in the Napoleonic era? Napoleon Bonaparte, although not a Freemason himself, understood perfectly well the political significance of Freemasonry and skillfully used Masonic structures to strengthen his power. Coming to power after the chaos of the Revolution, he saw Freemasonry as a tool for uniting French society and spreading his influence throughout Europe. The emperor's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, became Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France in 1804. These appointments were not accidental. Napoleon sought to place Masonic lodges under the control of his family and closest associates. Marshals Murat, Cambacérès, and other high-ranking officials of the empire also held leadership positions in Masonic organizations. During Napoleon's reign, the number of Masonic lodges in France grew from 300 to 1,220. These were not only French lodges. The emperor encouraged the creation of Masonic organizations in all territories under his control. Freemasonry became one of the tools of Napoleon's cultural expansion. An interesting figure was the Prussian king Frederick the Great, who had been a member of Masonic lodges since 1738. Although he ruled long before Napoleon, his Masonic beliefs influenced the formation of Prussian statehood. Frederick saw Freemasonry as a way to unite the German lands under Prussian hegemony. Austrian Emperor Franz I, on the contrary, banned Freemasonry in his domains after the French Revolution. However, many Austrian aristocrats secretly maintained Masonic ties, which created underlying tension in the empire. Masonic ideas penetrated Austria through diplomatic channels and cultural contacts. In Germany, Freemasonry played a special role in the process of national unification. German Freemasons were divided between those who supported French influence and those who sought German independence. This duality was reflected in the creation of different Masonic systems and rites. Great Britain remained the center of regular Freemasonry, which opposed itself to the irregular lodges on the continent. English Freemasons were suspicious of Napoleon's reforms of Freemasonry and sought to preserve traditional forms of organization. This confrontation reflected the broader conflict between England and Napoleonic France. Russian Emperor Alexander I, the victor over Napoleon, had a complex relationship with Freemasonry. In his youth, he was interested in Masonic ideas, but later became suspicious of secret societies. Many Russian officers who participated in the Napoleonic Wars became acquainted with Western Freemasonry and brought new ideas to Russian lodges. Masonic ties often crossed the lines of military confrontation. During the Napoleonic Wars, Freemasons from opposing armies sometimes met in a neutral setting to discuss common ideals. These contacts contributed to a more humane conduct of war and the exchange of prisoners. The Continental blockade of England had an unexpected consequence for Freemasonry. It strengthened ties between continental lodges. French, German, Italian, and Polish Freemasons interacted more actively with each other, which contributed to the formation of a pan-European Masonic space. The Kingdom of Italy under Napoleon became a testing ground for Masonic experiments. Italian lodges united representatives of various states of the Apennine Peninsula, contributing to the formation of Italian national identity. Later, these ties would play an important role in the process of Italian unification. The Duchy of Warsaw, created by Napoleon, also became a center of Masonic activity. Polish Freemasons saw the empire as an opportunity to restore their country's independence. Prince Józef Poniatowski and other Polish leaders used Masonic channels to coordinate the national liberation movement. Napoleon understood that Masonic ideas of equality and brotherhood among nations could be both an ally and an enemy to his imperial ambitions. On the one hand, they helped legitimize his power as a continuation of revolutionary conquests. On the other hand, they could fuel national movements against French rule. Napoleon's fall in 1814–15 was a turning point for European Freemasonry. The Restoration led to the persecution of Freemasons in a number of countries, but at the same time contributed to the spread of liberal ideas among those who did not accept a return to the old order. What role did Freemasons play in Russia during this period? Freemasonry entered Russia in the mid-18th century and quickly found fertile ground among the enlightened nobility. The first Russian lodge, Silence, was founded in St. Petersburg, in 1751, under the patronage of Count Roman Larionovich Vorontsov. From the very beginning, Russian Freemasonry was distinguished by a special mystical orientation and a desire for moral self-improvement. Empress Catherine II was initially favorable toward Freemasonry, seeing it as a tool for spreading enlightenment among the Russian nobility. Many of her associates, including Prince Grigory Grigorievich Orlov and Count Nikolai Ivanovich Panin, were members of Masonic lodges. The Empress herself, although not formally initiated, showed interest in Masonic ideas of religious tolerance and humanism. Ivan Vladimirovich Lopukhin, one of the leaders of the Martinist movement, played a special role in the development of Russian Freemasonry. His translations of mystical writings and his own works formed a special Russian type of Freemasonry, combining Western rationality with Orthodox spirituality. Lopukhin sought to create a synthesis of Christian mysticism and Masonic philosophy. Nikolai Ivanovich Novikov, a famous educator and publisher, used his Masonic connections to spread education in Russia. His Truten, Живописец, and other publications promoted the ideas of religious tolerance, humane treatment of serfs, and the need for public education. Novikov's Masonic printing houses published translations of European philosophers and mystics. Moscow Freemasons created a unique system of charity and education. They founded schools, hospitals, orphanages, and nursing homes for the elderly. The Masonic idea of serving one's neighbor was embodied in specific social projects that were ahead of official state policy in this area. The French Revolution radically changed Catherine II's attitude toward Freemasonry. The Empress saw Masonic lodges as a source of revolutionary contagion, and in 1792 banned the activities of secret societies. Novikov was arrested and imprisoned in the Schlisselburg fortress, and many lodges ceased their activities. Emperor Paul I, upon ascending the throne, freed Novikov and allowed Masonic lodges to operate on the condition that they be controlled by the state. Paul himself showed interest in knightly orders and even accepted the title of Grand Master of the Order of Malta, which brought him closer to the Masonic tradition. However, his reign was too short to have a serious impact on the Masonic movement. Alexander I was favorable to Freemasonry at the beginning of his reign, seeing in it a force that would promote liberal reforms. Many of his associates, including Mikhail Mikhailovich Speransky, had connections with Masonic lodges. Masonic ideas about the need for gradual reforms and the enlightenment of the people influenced government policy during the first decade of Alexander's reign. The Napoleonic Wars brought new Masonic influences to Russia. Russian officers serving in Europe became acquainted with Western forms of Freemasonry and brought them back to their homeland. At the same time, the growth of patriotic sentiment contributed to the development of specifically Russian forms of Freemasonry, which emphasized orthodox and national identity. The Decembrist movement had deep roots in Russian Freemasonry. Many future Decembrists, including Pavel Ivanovich Pestel, Kondraty Fedorovich Ryleev, and Sergei Grigorievich Volkonsky, were members of Masonic lodges. Masonic ideas of equality, brotherhood, and service to the fatherland were transformed into a revolutionary program for the transformation of Russia. The secret societies of the Decembrists, the Union of Salvation, the Union of Welfare, the Northern and Southern Societies, largely inherited the organizational principles of Masonic lodges. The system of degrees of initiation, oaths of allegiance, conspiracy, and mutual aid were borrowed from Masonic practice. Even the rituals of the Decembrist societies resembled Masonic ceremonies. The tragedy on Senate Square on December 14, 1825, was a turning point in the history of Russian Freemasonry. Nicholas I linked Freemasonry with treason and effectively banned the activities of lodges. Many Freemasons were arrested, exiled, or forced to emigrate. However, Masonic ideas did not disappear from Russian culture. They were transformed into the literary works of Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, Mikhail Yuryevich Lermontov, and other writers, many of whom had connections with Freemasonry. Masonic symbolism and philosophy influenced the development of Russian literature and social thought. The Orthodox Church played an important role in the fight against Freemasonry, seeing it as a threat to traditional religious values. Metropolitan Filaret, Drozdov, and other church hierarchs warned against becoming enamored with Masonic ideas, considering them incompatible with Orthodox doctrine. Despite official bans, Masonic traditions persisted in Russian culture in a hidden form. They influenced the formation of Russian liberalism and the democratic movement. Many ideas that originated in Masonic lodges in the 18th and early 19th centuries manifested themselves in the reforms of Alexander II and the social movement of the second half of the 19th century. How did Freemasonry develop in the British Empire? Great Britain remains the only country where Freemasonry has maintained close ties with the royal family for almost 3 centuries. This tradition began with the Prince of Wales, the future King George IV, who became a Freemason in 1787. Since then, almost all male members of the British royal family have been initiated into Freemasonry. Prince Consort Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, played a special role in the establishment of Royal Freemasonry. Although the Queen herself did not approve of her husband's interest in secret societies, Albert saw Freemasonry as a tool for promoting education, science, and social reform. Under his patronage, British Freemasonry acquired a respectable and charitable character. King Edward VII, Victoria's eldest son, was one of the most active monarchs in British history. He passed all degrees of Masonic initiation and held high positions in several lodges. During his numerous trips abroad, the king often met with local Masons, strengthening the international ties of the British Empire. The Duke of Kent, Prince Edmund, Queen Victoria's uncle, served as Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England from 1832 to 1843. Under his leadership, English Freemasonry strengthened its position as the mother organization for Masonic jurisdictions around the world. The prince contributed to the standardization of Masonic rituals and administrative procedures. The British colonial system contributed to the spread of English Freemasonry throughout the world. Colonial administrators, military officers, and merchants established lodges in India, Australia, South Africa, and other parts of the empire. These lodges served not only as centers of social interaction, but also as instruments of political influence. In India, Freemasonry became an important element of British rule. The lodges brought together British officials, officers, and local Indians loyal to the crown. Some Indian princes and aristocrats were initiated into Freemasonry, which was supposed to symbolize their integration into the British administrative system. Australian Masonic lodges played a special role in shaping colonial society. They brought together settlers from different social backgrounds and contributed to the creation of a new Australian identity. Many of the founding fathers of the Australian Federation were active Freemasons. Irish Freemasonry developed under the special conditions of religious and national confrontation. The Grand Lodge of Ireland, founded in 1725, sought to overcome the confessional differences between Protestants and Catholics. In practice, however, Irish lodges often reflected existing social and religious divisions. Scottish Freemasonry claimed to be older than the English tradition. The Grand Lodge of Scotland asserted its independence from London and developed its own rituals and degrees of initiation. These differences reflected the broader cultural and political characteristics of Scottish identity within the United Kingdom. The First World War was a test for British Freemasonry. Many Freemasons served in the Army and Navy, and lodges organized charitable assistance for the families of those killed and wounded. King George V, himself a Freemason, supported these efforts and regularly visited military hospitals accompanied by his Masonic brothers. George VI, father of the current Queen Elizabeth II, was also an active Freemason. During World War II, he used his Masonic connections to maintain contact with allies and coordinate anti-fascist activities. Masonic lodges in occupied Europe often served as centers of resistance to Nazism. The modern British royal family maintains Masonic traditions, albeit with a certain degree of caution. Prince Michael, Duke of Kent, is the current Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England, continuing the family tradition of royal patronage of Freemasonry. British prime ministers have also often had ties to Freemasonry. Winston Churchill, although not an active Freemason, maintained friendly relations with Masonic leaders and used Masonic channels for informal diplomacy during the war. Critics of British Freemasonry accuse it of creating a shadow state and influencing the judiciary, the police, and the civil service. These accusations are periodically the subject of parliamentary debates and journalistic investigations, but have never been documented. A distinctive feature of British Freemasonry is its openness and publicity. Unlike in continental countries, where Freemasonry is often shrouded in secrecy, British lodges regularly hold public events and publish reports on their activities. This transparency helps to maintain the positive image of Freemasonry in British society. Women's Freemasonry in the UK has its own unique history. The Order of Women Freemasons and the Honourable Women's Brotherhood developed in parallel with men's Freemasonry and achieved a certain degree of recognition, although they did not receive official approval from the United Grand Lodge of England. But how did relations between Freemasonry and the authorities develop in 19th century America? The 19th century was the golden age of American Freemasonry, when 14 of the 24 U.S. presidents were Freemasons. This tradition, established by George Washington, shaped the political culture of the young republic and influenced the formation of American democratic institutions throughout the century. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, was initiated into Freemasonry in 1803 at the Harmony Number, one lodge in Tennessee. His presidency was marked by democratic reforms, the expansion of voting rights, and the fight against elite privilege. Masonic principles of equality of all citizens before the law were embodied in Jacksonian democracy. The Anti-Masonic Party, which emerged in the late 1820s, became the first third political party in U.S. history, and the first party to hold a national convention to nominate a presidential candidate. The party accused Freemasons of creating a secret government and corruption, reflecting populist sentiments in American society. James Knox Polk, the 11th president, used Masonic connections to pursue an expansionist policy. His concept of America's manifest destiny to spread from ocean to ocean echoed Masonic ideas about the worldwide spread of the principles of freedom and democracy. The acquisition of Texas, California, and other territories was carried out with the active participation of local Masonic lodges. Zachary Taylor, the 12th president, although a Freemason, died 16 months after taking office, without having had time to exert Masonic influence on politics. His successor, Millard Fillmore, on the contrary, actively used Masonic channels to resolve the crisis of 1850 and prevent civil war. Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, faced growing tensions over the issue of slavery. His attempts to find a compromise between the North and the South reflected Masonic principles of brotherhood and reconciliation, but proved ineffective in the face of the irreconcilable ideological differences within American society. James Buchanan, the last president before the Civil War, was also a Freemason, but his indecisiveness and attempts to maintain the status quo led to a deepening of the national crisis. Masonic ideas about maintaining harmony and unity proved powerless in the face of the fundamental contradictions of American society. Andrew Johnson, who became president after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, was the only Freemason among the leaders of the Reconstruction of the South. His conflict with radical Republicans in Congress was partly explained by Freemason beliefs about the need for reconciliation and forgiveness of the defeated South. James Abram Garfield, the 20th president, was one of the most educated Freemasons in American history. His assassination a few months after his inauguration deprived the country of a leader who could have effectively used Masonic principles to solve the problems of post-war America. Chester Alan Arthur, who succeeded Garfield, carried out civil service reforms aimed at ending the system of political appointments. Masonic ideas about fairness and competence influenced his administrative policies and contributed to the modernization of the federal apparatus. William McKinley, the 25th president, used Masonic connections to strengthen America's position as a world power. The Spanish-American War and the acquisition of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam reflected Masonic ideas about spreading American values throughout the world. Theodore Roosevelt, although not formally a Freemason, maintained friendly relations with Masonic leaders and shared many of their ideas about social justice and progressive reforms. His Big Stick policy and the construction of the Panama Canal received support in Masonic circles. William Howard Taft, the 27th president, was the last Freemason in the White House before Franklin Roosevelt. His conservative policies and conflict with the progressive wing of the Republican Party reflected the internal contradictions of American Freemasonry between traditionalism and reformism. Masonic lodges played an important role in American frontier life. Settlers moving westward established lodges in new towns and territories, creating social ties and maintaining order in the absence of strong state institutions. Masonic lodges often became centers of social life in American cities. The Civil War divided American Freemasonry, as it did American society as a whole. Northern and Southern lodges severed ties with each other, and Freemasons fought on both sides of the conflict. However, Masonic traditions of mutual aid sometimes cross the front lines. There are known cases of Freemasons from opposing armies helping each other. The restoration of unity in American Freemasonry after the war took place in parallel with the national reconstruction. Masonic lodges played an important role in healing the wounds of the Civil War and restoring national unity. Masonic principles of brotherhood and forgiveness contributed to reconciliation between the North and the South. How did Freemasonry influence the unification of Germany during this period? The unification of Germany in the 19th century was one of the most complex processes in European history, and German Freemasonry was divided on the question of what the future German nation should be. Prussian, Austrian, Bavarian, and Saxon Freemasons held different views on national unity, reflecting broader political divisions in the German lands. Prussian King Frederick William III was wary of Freemasonry after the Napoleonic Wars, but did not dare to ban it completely because of the influence of Masonic lodges among the officer corps and civil servants. Prussian Freemasons were divided between supporters of a lesser German solution under Prussian hegemony and advocates of a broader union involving Austria. Karl von Gartenberg, Prussian chancellor and reformer, used his Masonic connections to promote liberal reforms in Prussia. His reforms of education, local government, and the judicial system reflected Masonic ideas about the need for enlightenment and just rule. Gartenberg believed that a modernized Prussia would be able to lead the unification of Germany. Austrian Chancellor Clemens von Metternich saw Freemasonry as a threat to legitimate monarchical institutions and the Holy Alliance. His system of political equilibrium in Europe contradicted Masonic ideas about national self-determination and democratic reforms. The Congress of Vienna in 1814 to 1815 established an order that many German Freemasons considered an obstacle to national unity. The German Customs Union, Zollverein, created in 1834 under the leadership of Prussia, received the support of Masonic lodges, which saw economic integration as a path to political unification. Prussian and other German Freemasons actively promoted the idea of free trade between German states. The Revolution of 1848 was a turning point for German Freemasonry. The Frankfurt Parliament included many Masonic deputies who sought to create a unified constitutional Germany. Masonic ideas of civil rights, popular representation, and national sovereignty were reflected in the constitutional drafts of the revolutionary period. Friedrich Dahlmann, a prominent liberal politician and Freemason, was one of the authors of the Frankfurt Constitution. His concept of a constitutional monarchy for a united Germany combined Masonic principles of limiting power with pragmatic considerations about the need to preserve monarchical institutions. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor and architect of German unification, was not a Freemason, but he understood the importance of Masonic networks for political mobilization. He skillfully exploited the differences between Masonic groups and neutralized potential opposition to his plans for a small German unification. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 divided German Freemasonry. Austrian Freemasons saw the Prussian victory as a threat to the multinational character of the Habsburg Empire, while Prussian lodges welcomed the elimination of Austrian rivalry in Germany. The war with France in 1870–71 united German Freemasons against a common enemy. French Masonic lodges, which had previously maintained friendly relations with their German brothers, found themselves on the other side of the barricades. This confrontation demonstrated the limitations of Masonic internationalism in the face of national conflicts. The proclamation of the German Empire at the Palace of Versailles on January 18, 1871, was a triumph for Prussian Freemasons who supported the lesser German solution. However, this success came at the cost of Austria's exclusion and the strengthening of authoritarian tendencies in German politics. Although Emperor Wilhelm I was not a Freemason, he appointed people with Masonic connections to key positions. This allowed the liberal-minded part of German society to be integrated into the new imperial system and ensured support for the unification policy. The Kulturkampf, Bismarck's struggle against the Catholic Church, received the support of German Freemasons, who saw Catholicism as an obstacle to German unity and progress. Masonic lodges actively supported the government's anti-clerical policies and contributed to the secularization of German society. The social democratic movement in Germany had a complex relationship with Freemasonry. On the one hand, many Masonic ideas about equality and social justice were close to socialist principles. On the other hand, the bourgeois character of Masonic lodges contradicted the proletarian ideology of the Social Democrats. German Freemasons also played an important role in the colonial expansion of the empire. They supported the creation of German colonies in Africa and the Pacific, viewing colonial policy as a means of spreading German civilization and Masonic values. Anti-Semitic sentiments in German society at the end of the 19th century created problems for German Freemasonry. Some lodges excluded Jews from their ranks, while others maintained the principles of equality regardless of religious affiliation. These contradictions foreshadowed the tragedies of the 20th century. The unification of Germany under Prussian hegemony changed the balance of power in Europe and posed new challenges for European Freemasonry. German power required Masonic lodges in other countries to rethink their international ties and strategies. How did this affect the revolutionary movements of the 20th century? The 20th century brought a series of revolutions that changed the political map of the planet, and Freemasonry found itself at the center of many of these upheavals. The Russian Revolution of 1905 was the first serious test for European Freemasonry, demonstrating both the power and the limitations of Masonic influence on revolutionary processes. Sergei Yulievich Vita, chairman of the Council of Ministers and architect of Russian constitutionalism, was not formally a Freemason, but he maintained contacts with Masonic circles and used their influence to promote liberal reforms. The Manifesto of October 17th, which proclaimed civil liberties and the creation of a parliament, reflected Masonic ideas of constitutional government and the separation of powers. Alexander Fyodorovich Kerensky, a key figure in the February Revolution of 1917, was an active Freemason and used his Masonic connections to coordinate anti-monarchist activities. The Masonic Lodge, Great East of the Peoples of Russia, created in 1908, became the center of the liberal democratic opposition to the Tsarist regime. The Grand Lodge of Russia, restored after the Revolution of 1905, united representatives of the Cadet Party, the Octobrists, and other liberal groups. Pavel Nikolaevich Milyukov, leader of the Cadets, although not a Freemason himself, maintained close ties with Masonic politicians and shared their constitutional ideals. The provisional government included many Freemasons. In addition to Kerensky, they included Foreign Minister Mikhail Ivanovich Tereshchenko, War Minister Nikolai Ivanovich Guchkov, and the Minister of the Interior, Alexander Ivanovich Guchkov, Minister Alexander Ivanovich Guchkov, and others. Masonic principles of religious tolerance and civil equality were reflected in the legislation of the provisional government. However, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, were hostile to Freemasonry, seeing it as a tool of the bourgeoisie. After the October Revolution, Masonic lodges were banned, and many Freemasons were subjected to repression. The Masonic idea of gradual reform contradicted the Bolshevik concept of revolutionary restructuring of society. In Germany, defeat in World War I and the collapse of the Kaiser's empire created conditions for the revitalization of the Masonic movement. The Weimar Republic was proclaimed with the active participation of Social Democrats, many of whom had connections with Masonic lodges. Friedrich Ebert, the first president of the Republic, was not a Freemason, but he supported Masonic ideas of democracy and civil rights. The Hungarian Revolution of 1918 also had Masonic roots. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, leader of the liberal democratic opposition, was a Freemason and used his Masonic connections to organize revolutionary activities. The short-lived Hungarian People's Republic attempted to embody Masonic ideals of popular sovereignty and social justice. The Turkish Revolution, which led to the creation of modern Turkey under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, also had Masonic aspects. Many of the young Turks who organized the revolution of 1908 were members of Masonic lodges. Masonic ideas of secularization and modernization found expression in the Kemalist reforms. The Mexican Revolution of 1910 developed with the active participation of Freemasons. Francisco Madero, one of the leaders of the revolution, was a Freemason and sought to build a democratic Mexico based on constitutional principles. Masonic lodges served as centers of anti-dictatorial activity against the regime of Porfirio Diaz. In China, the Xinhai Revolution of 1911, which overthrew the Qing Empire, also had Masonic roots. Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China, was not formally a Freemason, but his ideas of the three people's principles, nationalism, democracy, and people's welfare, resonated with Masonic philosophy. The Portuguese Revolution of 1910, which established a republic, was organized with the active participation of Freemasons. Teófilo Braga, the provisional president of the republic, was a Freemason and pursued an anti-clerical policy aimed at limiting the influence of the Catholic Church in politics and education. World War I divided international Freemasonry along national lines. French, British, and American Freemasons supported the Entente, while German and Austrian lodges stood behind the Central Powers. Masonic principles of internationalism and brotherhood proved powerless in the face of nationalist passions. The Versailles Peace Conference of 1919 was attended by many Freemason politicians. The principles of national self-determination and the creation of the League of Nations reflected Masonic ideas about a just world order and international cooperation. The revolutionary wave in Europe after World War I, in Germany, Hungary, Bavaria, often had Masonic roots. Masonic lodges served as the organizational basis for liberal democratic movements seeking to create constitutional republics on the ruins of monarchical empires. The rise of fascist movements in Europe became a challenge for Freemasonry. Mussolini in Italy and later Hitler in Germany saw Freemasonry as a threat to totalitarian regimes. Masonic principles of individual freedom and critical thinking contradicted the fascist ideology of subordination of the individual to the state. The Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 was a tragedy for Spanish Freemasonry. The Republican government included many Freemasons, while the Francoists saw Freemasonry as an enemy of Catholic Spain. Franco's victory led to a complete ban on Freemasonry in the country. How did American Freemasons respond to the challenges of the Great Depression? Franklin Delano Roosevelt was initiated into Freemasonry on November 28, 1911, at Holland Lodge No. 8 in New York City. His Masonic beliefs deeply influenced the formation of the New Deal, a program of economic and social reforms that brought America out of the Great Depression and laid the foundations for the modern welfare state. Masonic principles of brotherhood and mutual aid were embodied in Roosevelt's Social Security programs. The creation of social insurance, unemployment assistance, and pension programs reflected the Masonic idea that society should care for its most vulnerable members. Roosevelt often said that the rich had a duty to help the poor, not out of charity, but out of justice. Henry Agard Wallace, Roosevelt's vice president during his third term, was an active Freemason and mystic. His influence on New Deal policies was significant, especially in the area of agricultural reform. Wallace believed that Masonic principles could form the basis for building a just society where economic prosperity was combined with spiritual development. Harry Hopkins, Roosevelt's closest advisor and architect of many New Deal programs, although not a Freemason himself, shared Masonic ideas about social justice. His public works and relief programs embodied the Masonic ideal of serving society and helping others. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps became the practical embodiment of Masonic ideas that work ennobles man, and that every member of society should have the opportunity to earn an honest living. These programs provided jobs for millions of Americans and created infrastructure that still serves the country today. Roosevelt used Masonic channels of communication to mobilize support for his reforms. Many congressmen and governors were Masons, which facilitated the passage of New Deal legislation. Masonic lodges across the country supported the president's initiatives and helped explain their necessity to voters. The U.S. Supreme Court, which initially blocked many New Deal programs, included several Masonic judges who gradually changed their attitude toward the president's initiatives. Hugo Black, appointed to the court by Roosevelt, was a Mason and consistently supported the expansion of federal powers in the social sphere. Masonic ideas of religious tolerance influenced Roosevelt's policy toward religious minorities. His administration actively recruited Jews, Catholics, and representatives of other faiths to work in the government, which was new to American politics at the time. Roosevelt believed that America should be a home for people of all faiths. The Good Neighbor policy toward Latin American countries also reflected Masonic principles of equality and mutual respect. The rejection of military intervention and support for democratic governments in the region were consistent with Masonic ideas that force should be used only for defense, not for suppression. Preparations for World War II took place with the active participation of Freemasons in the American government. Henry Stimson, Secretary of War, and Frank Knox, Secretary of the Navy, were both Freemasons and supported the policy of aid to the Allies even before America officially entered the war. The Lend-Lease program of aid to the Allies embodied Masonic ideas of international solidarity and assistance to those fighting for freedom. Roosevelt often used Masonic rhetoric about the struggle of light against darkness, freedom against tyranny, and democracy against despotism to justify American support for the anti-fascist coalition. The Atlantic Charter, signed by Roosevelt and Churchill in 1941, reflected Masonic principles of self-determination of peoples, economic cooperation, and the creation of a collective security system. The 8 points of the Charter echoed Masonic ideas about a just world order. Planning for the post-war world was also influenced by Masonic ideas. The creation of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank reflected the Masonic dream of a world government based on the principles of justice and cooperation. Roosevelt personally participated in Masonic ceremonies and used Masonic symbols in official events. The laying of the cornerstone of federal government buildings often took place according to Masonic ritual, with the president participating in a Masonic apron. Critics of the New Deal accused Roosevelt of creating a Masonic conspiracy against American capitalism. These accusations reflected broader concerns among conservative circles about the growing role of the federal government in the economy and social sphere. Roosevelt's death on April 12, 1945, marked the end of an era of active Masonic influence in American politics. His successor, Harry Truman, although a Mason himself, did not have the same authority and political skill to promote Masonic ideals in the post-war world. How did Freemasons end up on opposite sides of the Cold War? Harry Truman, the 33rd President of the United States, was one of the most active Freemasons in American history. He reached the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite and served as Grand Master of the Missouri Lodge. His decision to use atomic weapons against Japan and start the Cold War with the Soviet Union shaped world politics for half a century. The Truman Doctrine of 1947, which proclaimed American support for free peoples, reflected Masonic ideas about the struggle of light against darkness, freedom against tyranny. Truman sincerely believed that America had a moral right and duty to defend democratic values around the world from the communist threat. The Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of Europe received active support from American Masonic lodges. Freemasons saw economic aid to the Allies as the embodiment of the principles of brotherhood and mutual aid. George Marshall, although not a Freemason, shared the Masonic idea that a prosperous and democratic Europe would serve as a barrier against communist expansion. The creation of NATO in 1949 was the realization of the Masonic dream of an international organization of democratic nations. Many political leaders of the Alliance's founding countries were Masons and viewed NATO as the military-political embodiment of Masonic principles of collective defense and mutual support. The Soviet Union, on the contrary, saw Freemasonry as an instrument of Western imperialism and bourgeois ideology. Joseph Stalin and his successors viewed international Freemasonry as a form of ideological subversion against socialist countries. All Masonic organizations in the USSR and the Warsaw Pact countries were banned. Winston Churchill, although not formally a Freemason, maintained close ties with British Masonic leaders and used Masonic channels to coordinate Western policy during the Cold War. His famous Iron Curtain speech in Fulton reflected Masonic ideas about the confrontation between the free world and communist tyranny. European Masonic lodges became an important instrument of American soft power during the Cold War. The CIA, under the leadership of Allen Dulles, actively used Masonic connections to create networks of influence in Western Europe and counter-communist propaganda. French Freemasons played a special role in shaping European integration. Jean Monnet, the father of Europe, was not formally a Freemason, but he shared Masonic ideas about the need to overcome national differences for the common good. The European coal and steel community was the first step toward realizing the Masonic dream of a united Europe. Konrad Adenauer, the first Chancellor of West Germany, used Masonic connections to integrate West Germany into the Western community. Although Adenauer himself was not a Freemason due to his Catholic beliefs, he understood the importance of Masonic networks in restoring trust in Germany after the Nazi period. The Korean War was the first military conflict of the Cold War, where Masonic principles clashed with communist ideology. Douglas MacArthur, commander of the American forces, was a Freemason and viewed the war as a crusade against communism. His conflict with President Truman reflected divisions within American Freemasonry over methods of combating communism. The creation of the CIA in 1947 took place with the active participation of Freemasons. Many senior intelligence officers were members of Masonic lodges, which facilitated the coordination of covert operations and the creation of agent networks around the world. Masonic connections were used to recruit agents and create cover for intelligence activities. The Hungarian Uprising of 1956 and the subsequent Soviet intervention demonstrated the limitations of Western support for Eastern European democratic movements. American and Western European Freemasons expressed solidarity with the Hungarian rebels, but their governments did not decide on military intervention. The Berlin Crisis of 1961 and the construction of the Berlin Wall became symbols of the division of the world into the Masonic West and the Communist East. John F. Kennedy, although not a Freemason, used Masonic rhetoric about freedom and democracy in his Berlin speeches. The Caribbean Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Masonic leaders on both sides of the Atlantic called for restraint and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Masonic principles of resolving disputes through negotiation rather than force helped prevent disaster. The Vietnam War divided American Freemasonry. The older generation of Freemasons supported the anti-communist struggle, while younger lodge members opposed military intervention. These differences reflected a broader crisis in American society in the 1960s. The civil rights movement in the United States received support from many Masonic lodges, especially in the northern states. Masonic principles of equality for all people, regardless of race, contradicted the segregation laws of the South. However, Southern lodges often reflected the racial prejudices of their region. The détente of the 1970s opened up new opportunities for international Masonic cooperation. Visits by American Masons to neutral and non-aligned countries contributed to the creation of a third way between capitalism and communism. Masonic lodges in India, Egypt, and other developing countries served as bridges between East and West. The election of Ronald Reagan as president in 1980 marked a new phase in the Cold War. Reagan was not a Freemason, but his tough anti-communist stance was supported by American Masonic lodges. The Star Wars program and military confrontation with the USSR reflected the Masonic belief in the ultimate victory of good over evil. How have these contradictions manifested themselves in contemporary political leaders? In the modern world, Masonic influence on politics has become less obvious, but no less significant. Many leaders of democratic countries maintain ties with Masonic organizations or share Masonic values, although they do not always openly declare this. The evolution of Freemasonry in the 21st century reflects changes in the global political system. Jacques Chirac, President of France from 1995 to 2007, was a member of a Masonic lodge and actively promoted the ideas of European integration. His vision of a Europe of nations reflected Masonic principles of unity and diversity and the peaceful coexistence of different cultures under the umbrella of common democratic values. Nicolas Sarkozy, who succeeded Chirac as president, was not officially a Freemason, but he maintained close ties with Masonic circles and used their influence to promote his political initiatives. His reforms of the French economy and active foreign policy reflected Masonic ideas about the need for progress and international leadership. In the UK, the tradition of royal patronage of Freemasonry continues. Prince Michael of Kent, Queen Elizabeth II's cousin, has served as Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England since 1967. Under his leadership, British Freemasonry has adapted to modern conditions while preserving its traditions and principles. Tony Blair, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007, was not a Freemason, but his political philosophy of the Third Way resonated with Masonic ideas of reconciling opposites and seeking compromise. His role in the peace process in Northern Ireland reflected Masonic principles of brotherhood and mutual understanding. David Cameron and subsequent British prime ministers have grappled with the question of Freemasonry's role in contemporary politics. Brexit and the associated debates about national sovereignty versus European integration reflected the tension between Masonic cosmopolitanism and rising populism. In Germany, Masonic influence is manifested through public organizations and foundations. German politicians rarely openly declare their Masonic affiliation, but Masonic ideas of European unity and international cooperation have permeated German foreign policy from the time of Willy Brandt to Angela Merkel. Silvio Berlusconi, who dominated Italian politics for a long time, was not a Freemason, but his media empire and political connections were often associated with Masonic networks of influence. The scandals surrounding the Propaganda II Lodge in the 1980s left Italian society wary of secret organizations. In the United States, the Masonic legacy continues to influence political culture. although the last Masonic presidents, Harry Truman and Gerald Ford, ruled several decades ago. Contemporary American politicians rarely speak openly about Masonic ties, preferring to emphasize their religious affiliation with the main Christian denominations. Vladimir Putin is not officially a Freemason, but his political philosophy of sovereign democracy is opposed to Western Masonic ideals of globalization and cosmopolitanism. The Russian government views Western Freemasonry as an instrument of geopolitical influence and soft power in opposition to traditional Russian values. In China, Xi Jinping is pursuing a policy against secret societies, including Masonic organizations. The Chinese Communist Party sees Freemasonry as a threat to its unified ideology and party discipline. However, Chinese Masonic lodges continue to operate in Hong Kong and among the Chinese diaspora around the world. Modern Freemasonry is facing an identity crisis in the age of digital technology and social media. The traditional secrecy of Masonic lodges conflicts with the demands for transparency and accountability in modern democratic society. Many lodges are moving towards greater openness and publicity. The feminization of politics and the struggle for gender equality are creating new challenges for traditionally male-dominated Freemasonry. Women's Masonic organizations are demanding recognition and equality with men's lodges, sparking debate about the future of Masonic traditions. Globalization and multiculturalism are changing the nature of modern Freemasonry. Lodges in large cities bring together representatives of different cultures and religions, requiring the adaptation of traditional rituals and symbols to new realities. Technological innovations allow Freemasons to use virtual meetings and digital communications, but this contradicts the traditions of personal communication and ritual interaction. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated these changes and forced Masonic organizations to rethink their methods of operation. Contemporary Masonic leaders strive to maintain a balance between tradition and innovation, between secrecy and openness, between elitism and democracy. The future of Freemasonry depends on its ability to adapt to a changing world without losing its historical identity and values. What myths and realities surround modern Freemasonry? In the 21st century, Freemasonry has become the subject of numerous conspiracy theories, which often have nothing to do with historical reality. The internet and social media have contributed to the spread of myths about a world Masonic conspiracy, a secret government, and other fantastical versions of the influence of Freemasons on world politics. The myth of a world Masonic government is based on a misunderstanding of the structure of international Freemasonry. In reality, there is no single centralized Masonic organization that could coordinate the actions of all the lodges in the world. Masonic jurisdictions in different countries often compete with each other and hold different political views. The theory of Freemasons' control over the global economy also does not stand up to scrutiny. Although there have been and still are many successful businessmen and bankers among Freemasons, their economic activities are determined by market forces, not Masonic directives. The modern global economy is too complex to be controlled by any single organization. Conspiracy theorists often exaggerate the secrecy of Masonic lodges. In reality, modern Freemasonry is a legal and open organization in most countries. Masonic lodges publish lists of their members, hold public events, and support charitable programs. Only the rituals and methods of mutual recognition are secret. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories often link Freemasonry to a Jewish conspiracy. These theories ignore the fact that Freemasonry has always been a non-denominational organization that brings together people of different religions. Moreover, in many countries, Masonic lodges have been persecuted by anti-Semitic regimes on a par with Jewish communities. Theories about Masonic control over politics are often based on post hoc ergo propter hoc, a logical fallacy in which a causal relationship is established solely on the basis of temporal sequence. The fact that some politicians were Freemasons does not mean that their decisions were dictated by Masonic interests. Symbols that conspiracy theorists interpret as Masonic signs in architecture and currency often have much more ancient origins. The all-seeing eye, pyramids, eagles, and other symbols were used by various cultures long before Freemasonry came into existence. Their presence in state symbols can be explained by historical and cultural traditions, not Masonic influence. Conspiracy theories about Masonic rituals are often based on distorted or fictional sources. Real Masonic rituals are moral allegories aimed at the moral improvement of participants. They contain nothing criminal or antisocial. Modern researchers of Freemasonry use rigorous scientific methods to study the history and current state of Masonic organizations. Access to the archives of Masonic lodges provides an objective picture of their activities without mystification or speculation. Psychologists explain the popularity of conspiracy theories about Freemasonry by people's need for simple explanations of complex phenomena. The idea of a secret organization controlling world events seems more understandable than acknowledging the chaos and unpredictability of historical processes. Political demagogues often use fears of a Masonic conspiracy to mobilize support and distract attention from real problems. This tactic is particularly effective in societies with low levels of political culture and critical thinking. The education systems of many countries do not sufficiently prepare citizens to critically analyze information and recognize false conspiracy theories. Media literacy and fact-checking skills are becoming increasingly important in an age of information abundance. Social networks create echo chambers where conspiracy theories are amplified and spread without critical scrutiny. Content recommendation algorithms contribute to the radicalization of views and the reinforcement of false beliefs. The academic community of historians and political scientists continues to study the real influence of Freemasonry on political processes. This research shows that Freemasonry has indeed played an important role in history, but that role has been much more limited and controversial than conspiracy theorists claim. Combating conspiracy theories requires a comprehensive approach that includes education, the development of critical thinking, and increased transparency in political processes. Only in this way can society be protected from manipulation and misinformation. Future studies of Freemasonry should be based on scientific research methods, access to primary sources, and critical analysis of available data. Only in this way can historical facts be separated from myths and legends. How does Freemasonry influence contemporary politics in reality? In the modern world, the influence of Freemasonry on politics is more subtle and indirect than in previous centuries. Direct political action through Masonic channels has given way to cultural influence and the formation of public opinion through Masonic principles, which have become part of the democratic tradition. Modern Masonic organizations in developed democracies function as elite social clubs where representatives of various professions, lawyers, doctors, business people, officials, can meet in an informal setting. These contacts contribute to the formation of personal connections that can influence political and economic decision-making. In the UK, Masonic lodges continue to bring together members of the establishment. Judges, police officers, members of parliament, and local councils. Although Freemasonry has no direct political influence, membership in a lodge creates informal networks that can influence appointments and career advancement. French Freemasonry, especially the Grand Orient de France, maintains a more active political stance. French Freemasons openly support the secular principles of the Republic, advocate the separation of church and state, and defend human rights and civil liberties. Their influence is manifested through participation in public debates and support for certain political forces. In the United States, Masonic organizations have lost their former political influence but continue to play a role in local politics, especially in small towns and rural areas. Masonic lodges often serve as a platform for future politicians to meet and shape their worldview. Contemporary German Freemasonry focuses on humanitarian activities and international cooperation. German Freemasons actively support European integration, viewing it as the embodiment of Masonic ideals of peace and brotherhood among nations. In developing countries, Masonic lodges often play a more active political role. In Latin America, Africa, and Asia, Freemasonry can serve as a channel for political mobilization and the promotion of democratic values in authoritarian societies. International Masonic ties contribute to second-track diplomacy, informal contacts between representatives of different countries. Masonic conferences and meetings create opportunities for exchanging views on current international issues outside of official diplomatic channels. Masonic principles of tolerance and religious freedom influence contemporary policies of multiculturalism and the protection of minority rights. Many Masonic politicians support policies of inclusiveness and equal opportunity, viewing them as a continuation of Masonic traditions. The charitable activities of modern Masonic lodges influence the formation of social policy. Masonic hospitals, schools, scholarship programs, and other social projects complement government social protection programs and create alternative models of social security. Masonic educational initiatives influence the development of the education system. Masonic universities and schools promote the principles of secular education, critical thinking, and the scientific method, which influences educational policy. The environmental movement is also influenced by Masonic ideas about harmony between humans and nature. Modern Masons actively support environmental initiatives and sustainable development, viewing care for the environment as a moral obligation. Women's and mixed Masonic organizations influence gender policy by promoting ideas of gender equality and women's emancipation. These organizations serve as a platform for women's political activism in countries where traditional Freemasonry remains male-dominated. Digital transformation is changing the ways in which Freemasonry influences politics. Online Masonic communities can quickly mobilize to support certain political initiatives or candidates using social media and modern communication technologies. Opposition to authoritarian regimes remains an important aspect of the political activity of modern Freemasonry. In countries with limited civil liberties, Masonic lodges can serve as centers of democratic opposition and human rights advocacy. Globalization creates new opportunities for international Masonic cooperation in the political sphere. Transnational Masonic networks can influence the formation of global governance and international law. But what does the future hold for Freemasonry in world politics? The future of Freemasonry in world politics will be determined by the ability of this ancient institution to adapt to the radically changing world of the 21st century. Globalization, the digital revolution, climate change, and the rise of authoritarianism create new challenges and opportunities for the Masonic movement. Demographic changes in developed countries are threatening the traditional base of Freemasonry. Middle-aged and older white men from the middle class. To survive, Masonic organizations must attract women, young people, and members of ethnic minorities, which requires a rethinking of traditional rituals and structures. The secularization of society creates a paradoxical situation for Freemasonry. On the one hand, declining religiosity may attract people seeking spirituality outside traditional denominations. On the other hand, the Masonic requirement of belief in a supreme being may repel atheists and agnostics. The informational transparency of the modern world contradicts traditional Masonic secrecy. The younger generation is accustomed to openness and publicity on social media, which creates difficulties for organizations based on secret rituals and esoteric knowledge. Digital technologies open up new opportunities for the Masonic Brotherhood. Virtual lodges can bring together Masons from around the world, overcoming geographical barriers. Blockchain technologies can ensure the security of Masonic records and membership verification. Climate change could become a new unifying theme for world Freemasonry. Masonic principles of responsibility for future generations and harmony with nature make the environmental agenda a natural fit for Masonic organizations. The rise of authoritarianism in many countries poses a threat to Freemasonry, but at the same time increases its importance as a defender of democratic values. Masonic lodges can become centers of resistance to authoritarian regimes and the promotion of civil society. Artificial intelligence and automation will change the nature of work and social relations. Masonic ideas about the dignity of labor and mutual aid may become relevant in an era of technological unemployment and social inequality. Humanity's space expansion may create new opportunities for Masonic symbolism and rituals. Masonic ideas about building a better world will take on a literal meaning with the colonization of other planets. Genetic technologies and bioethics will pose new moral dilemmas, where Masonic principles of ethics and human dignity can serve as a guide for decision-making. Global crises, pandemics, economic upheavals, conflicts may increase the need for international cooperation and solidarity, which plays into Masonic ideals of universal brotherhood. Youth movements for social justice, although critical of elitist organizations, may find common ground with Masonic principles of equality and helping the oppressed. Women's leadership in politics may contribute to the recognition of women's Masonic organizations and the integration of gender equality into Masonic tradition. A multicultural society requires Freemasonry to re-examine its Christian roots and adapt to religious diversity. Buddhist, Islamic, and other Masonic traditions can enrich Western Freemasonry. Corporate social responsibility could become a new channel of Masonic influence as Masonic business leaders promote ethical principles in business practice. Educational technologies will enable Freemasonry to develop distance learning and philosophical education, making Masonic knowledge accessible to a wider audience. Geopolitical changes, the rise of Asia, the decline of Western hegemony, will require Freemasonry to adapt to new centers of power and influence. Asian Freemasonry may become more influential. Ultimately, the future of Freemasonry in world politics depends on its ability to remain relevant to new generations while preserving its fundamental values. Freemasonry must evolve to survive, but it cannot completely change its nature without losing its identity. The balance between tradition and innovation will determine whether Freemasonry will play a significant role in the politics of the future or remain a historical anachronism.